Welcome to Resourced and Resourceful Leadership, a podcast for people who care about the world and their impact in it. I'm your host, Dr. Christine Pettit. Thank you for listening in today. Today's episode, I'm going to share 3 books that have shaped my life, and in particular, shaped my life at critical moments. Particularly, they came to me during my college years, undergraduate and grad school. So that kind of, I think about 18 to 19 range, pretty sure 18 to when I was about 28 or so is when these books came into my life, maybe 29. And there was a point in 2011, 2012, where I went through a significant transition and I was defining what was important to me or what is important to me. And during that time, I identified these 3 pillars that were and are connected to how I see and approach the world. Initially, I articulated those pillars as creativity, mindfulness, and critical thinking. Interestingly, as I began to articulate my approach over the years, I shifted critical thinking to a commitment to social justice. And I think that was an interesting shift or articulation. Definitely my critical thinking is connected to a commitment to social justice. And I think it's really important to use critical thinking even in the context of advocating for social justice and evaluating what is just. I will probably say more about that in a future episode, but I was kind of surprised. I looked back at old journals and saw that that had been the evolution of the way that I expressed what I'm committed to and what shapes the way that I see the world. A few years later, probably early 2014 or 15, I went through a leadership program and we articulated our personal mission statement. And mine went something like blending creativity, mindfulness, and a commitment to social justice. I connect with my humanity and the humanity of others for positive social change. So there's a lot there in terms of what's important to me. And in between those 2 times, the kind of articulation of the 3 pillars and this personal mission statement, I remember facilitating workshops related to creativity and this integrated approach to creativity. I also had a year-long series of creative dream tea parties that were really inspired by one of the authors and books that I'm going to share about. But as I did these workshops and began sharing my perspective and how I see the world and the things that were shaping what I was creating, I also shared 3 books alongside, one for each pillar, basically. So for creativity, it was Succulent Wild Woman, Dancing with Your Wonderful Self by SARK, Susan Ariel Rainbow Kennedy, who, if you've listened to the podcast, you've heard me talk a lot about. And so that is the kind of creativity book. The other book of hers that I use really with the creative dream tea parties is called Making Your Creative Dreams Real. And that's one I recommend as well, especially as you're really honing what it is you want to create and focus on and what stops you and starts you. When it came to mindfulness, the book that I would share is Being Peace by Thich Nhat Hanh. Thich Nhat Hanh being a Zen Buddhist monk. And so I'll talk about that a little bit. And then when I would talk about my commitment to social justice or critical thinking, I shared Black Feminist Thought, Knowledge, Consciousness, and the Politics of Empowerment by Patricia Hill Collins. So today I'm going to share a little bit about each of those books, where I was when I found them, and some of my favorite parts with you. So getting started with Succulent Wild Woman, Dancing with Your Wonderful Self, I came across this book when I was, I believe, 18. I was a freshman in college, and I found it at this independent bookstore in Corvallis, Oregon, where I was going to college. My friend Jenny and I, we like to go and hang out at the bookstore and look at the different books there. We often went to get bagels in the morning, sometimes still wearing our pajamas. We'd go to the bookstore. There was like a candy shop there, chocolate shop. So I'm remembering just parts of that kind of small, wasn't really their downtown, but small kind of college adjacent neighborhood. And so I came across this book, Succulent Wild Woman, and I'm pretty sure we, looked at it together. It just stood out to me because the writing it's not regular typing. It looks like handwriting. There are some really colorful parts of the book. There's some pages that are in color. And it just was visually, it stood out to me. Plus, like, this idea of being a succulent wild woman. I mean, what is that? And I was someone who, I'm not quite sure how, I identified as a feminist from a young age, and at a time when it didn't really make sense. I was in high school, and I remember identifying as pro-choice when that was not the popular sentiment in my town. I was a cheerleader and identified as a feminist cheerleader and was really into cheerleading being a sport, which it totally is. But yeah, I had this kind of budding feminist identity, and though SARK doesn't use the word feminism, and I really haven't heard her kind of label her work in that way, but it's clearly about being empowered as a woman. And what I think probably struck me at the time was she was just talking about stuff that was not really, like, maybe it was kind of taboo to talk about. Definitely, like, and I'm just like looking at the different menu here, and the little section on vibrators is just standing out. It's jumping out to me here. But I'll read you the menu selections, kind of the grouping. So, being and becoming a succulent wild woman, fears, outrageous adventures, blocks to succulence, healing, sexuality, love and romance, fat, creative expression, money and power, portraits of succulent wild women, and building a succulent community. So all of those, just reading about all these things as an 18-year-old, I was struck by her candor, by how powerful it was, different, and I just loved it. And I think, just thinking back to Christine at that age, I think there was a real desire to fit in. I was finding myself as a girl slash growing into a woman at 18 at that point. And already in my life, I had identified myself in relationship to boys. I had already had a few relationships, long-term relationships, and was already establishing a pattern of serial dating and serial monogamy, which is a pattern that I wish I had broken much sooner in my life or ever, because I never really broke that pattern. But that said, I do think reading SARK and, some of the other influences helped me to have a more expansive view of relationships and myself in them. And as I was looking at this book, just preparing for this podcast, I was remembering a section of the book called The Good Girlfriend Must Die. She wrote, "As I advanced in my love relationship, I began to notice an insidious part of my personality that seemed to arise often. I named her the good girlfriend, and this is what I wrote about her. The good girlfriend always knows what to bring to a potluck, makes good potato salad, does all the communication tasks, makes her hair big and sexy, compromises about where to sit in the movies, is available, isn't too serious, is sexy, ... She goes through and lists a whole long list of things, including gives up when conflict feels thick, reveals only her best and finest qualities, does not fart audibly, does not fart exuberantly, holds most feelings in and smiles through a tight and suffocating mask." So she writes about that and, her long list of things that it means to be a good girlfriend. And she writes, "I had absorbed years of conditioning about how I thought women needed to be so that someone would love them." Later, she writes, "I had connected love and performance together. Love is a mystery and doesn't keep score. We are worthy of love as women just as we are." That message, whether it's, in a book about, or in the section about relationships or love or sex or money or creativity, I really resonated with that and appreciate that. We are worthy of love as women just as we are. Already at that age, I had experienced significant bouts of depression and struggled in some ways with my self-image. I would say it wasn't terrible, but I definitely, struggled. And there's all these measuring sticks for being a girl and a woman. And there are measuring sticks for sure for being a boy and a man. But my experience, I always say gender was kind of my first lens of understanding different systems of oppression and understanding where I fit in the world. It was really first as a girl and growing up a girl. And then other elements of my identity became more salient to me as I learned. I'll talk about that a little bit more later on. But growing up as a girl and feeling sexualized from a young age, I had internalized a lot of that. And so there was some freedom in this book, some freedom in its pages, and just like showing more acceptance. I think in one of the chapters on appearance, it talks about radical self-acceptance. So I just really appreciated this. And, I've had a long relationship with reading SARK's books, with calling into her inspiration line, going to events with her online and in person. I'm so grateful, really, that I connected with her work almost 30 years ago. It's definitely shaped my life in big ways. She has a poster at the beginning of the book too, called Being a Succulent Wild Woman. And here are the things it says on it. Bathe naked by moonlight. Invent your life over if it doesn't feel juicy. Smile when you feel like it. Marry yourself first. Promise to never leave you. Cradle your wounded places like precious babies. Shout, I'm here, I'm succulent, and I'm loud. Buy yourself gorgeous flowers. Practice extravagant lounging. That's another thing I love about SARK. She talks about napping and all kinds of things. Be delicious. Eat mangoes naked. Lick the juice off your arms. Discover your own goodness. Be rare, eccentric, and original. Describe yourself as marvelous. Paint your soul. Investigate your dark places with a flashlight. Make more mistakes. Weave your life into a net of love. You are enough, you have enough, you do enough. Celebrate your gorgeous friendships with women. Tell the truth faster. End blaming. Dress to please yourself. Let your creative spirit rush, flow, tumble, leak, spring, bubble, stream, dribble out of you. Be inwardly outrageous. Seek out other succulent wild women. Encourage the sharing of mutual treasures. I love that. And there was a second book, the Bodacious Book of Succulents, and so many other books. She has 14 bestsellers, maybe more, maybe one less. I don't know, but I think at least 14 bestsellers. And even like this idea of telling the truth faster, I remember that resonated with me over the years, and just thinking about what we don't say and what we hide from others and hide from ourselves in some ways. So anyway, that is Succulent Wild Woman. I mean, that's just the tip of the iceberg. A few years ago, she released the 25th anniversary edition of this book, and it's expanded. I definitely recommend you check it out. The other books that I mentioned that I've used a lot and appreciated a lot of hers is Make Your Creative Dreams Real. And I'm just looking it up because I like the tagline. Oh yeah. Make Your Creative Dreams Real, a plan for procrastinators, perfectionists, busy people, and people who would really rather sleep all day. So you can see kind of that sense of humor and inspiration and realness. And in each book, I've learned practical tools too. There's the narrative and the story, but there's these practical tools as well. So I definitely encourage you to check out her work if you haven't yet, and I'm sure I will keep talking about her work on this podcast as well. All right, the next book that I came into contact with is on that critical thinking or commitment to social justice, the way that I connect it to and my approach. It was really shaped by Black feminist thought in this book, but also Black feminists and Black women who have articulated their knowledge and kind of particular standpoints. There's Patricia Hill Collins. Kimberly Crenshaw is someone whose work really resonated with me, looking at kind of the legal aspects of race and intersectionality. I'll get into that a little bit. Bell Hooks, so much beauty and wisdom in her writing as well. But Black feminist thought was like a real big one for me because I came across it when I was a graduate student in my PhD program for sociology. And it was contemporary sociological theory. So grateful. My advisor, the person who became my advisor, Dr. Ellen Reese, she included this book in the syllabus, and that's part of our reading. And so I think I really appreciated it because well, just a number of the concepts resonated with me. So I'll just share some of them. I pulled out some quotations. My office and room is such a mess right now that I know I have recently had these books, both the Black Feminist Thought and Being Peace, but I can't find them right now. Luckily, there were lots of good quotes off of the internet when I was looking. So, Black Feminist Thought really challenges this theme in academia and sociology that was actually prevalent in my department, as well, of challenging this idea of kind of these universalizable theories that are distant from everyday life, that are abstract, that treat everyone as the same, and don't recognize the specific and situated knowledge of different groups. And in particular, Patricia Hill Collins is talking about the situated knowledge of Black women. And so this book is both, to me, it's both a critique of academia and kind of traditional ways of knowing and traditional recognitions of theory, as well as the abstraction of theory from action and the separation of those two things. So I have some quotations I want to pull out. I mean, one, as I was just saying, is academia has this push to separate thought from action. And she writes, "This dimension of a Black woman's standpoint rejects either or dichotomous thinking that claims that either thought or concrete action is desirable and that merging them is impossible." And I see in her work challenging a lot of binaries, challenging either or thinking. And we see that too in the way that she looks at the concept of privilege. So actually it was the last episode that made me, my last podcast episode that made me want to record this episode. It's one that it's been an idea of mine since starting to record. The podcast is covering books that have shaped my life. But in the last episode, when I interviewed David, I referenced this book without crediting Patricia Hill Collins. And I thought, okay, now is a really important time to do that. So in particular, I reference this idea of we all have penalty and privilege. We all carry that, and it looks different and is expressed different, kind of depending on the context. And so that's something that she talks about in her book. She talks about your social location, kind of where you fit within systems of oppression, or what she calls the matrix of domination. And she writes, "Placing African American women and other excluded groups in the center of analysis opens up possibilities for a both-and conceptual stance, one in which all groups possess varying amounts of penalty and privilege in one historically created system. In this system, for example, white women are penalized by their gender, but privileged by their race. Depending on the context, an individual may be an oppressor, a member of an oppressed group, or simultaneously oppressor and oppressed." So I always resonated with this intersectional approach to understanding identity. And, well, I resonated with it as soon as I heard it and read it. It made sense to me. So rejecting that either or thinking, even when it comes to penalty and privilege, this both and conceptual stance in which all groups possess varying amounts of penalty and privilege. And I mean, you can certainly see ways where, there's so many different intersecting points that influence our lives and where we fit within this overarching, what she calls matrix of domination. I'm going to look and see if I have a quote here that defines that. So the matrix of domination is her theory of explaining how interlocking systems of oppression, such as race, class, gender, and sexuality, or you might say such as white supremacy, capitalism, patriarchy, and heterosexism, to look at the systemic, intersect to create unique experiences of privilege and disadvantage. In her book, she talks about how power is not just additive, but it's complex, and it's a systemic and reinforcing structure. She talks about different domains that are related to this and how power is organized. So in the structural domain, that organizes oppression. For example, these are laws, policies, and institutions. The disciplinary domain manages oppression. This is bureaucracy, surveillance. The hegemonic domain legitimizes oppression. This is ideologies and cultural myths. And in the interpersonal domain, these are the everyday interactions that can reinforce or challenge power differentials. So I appreciate her centering to the experiences of Black women and of highlighting ways of knowing that are possible when particular experience is centered. She writes, theory of all types is often presented as being so abstract that it can be appreciated only by a select few. Though often highly satisfying to academics, this definition excludes those who do not speak the language of elites and thus reinforces social relations of domination. Educated elites typically claim that only they are qualified to produce theory and believe that only they can interpret not only their own, but everyone else's experiences. Moreover, educated elites often use this belief to uphold their own privilege. So Patricia Hill Collins, Dr. Collins, really looks at centering other ways of knowing, whether it is theory articulated by Black women in academia, like what she's doing, or through poetry, through storytelling, through other modes of communication. And often she notes that those ways of knowing are looked down upon in academic and elite circles. She writes, suppressing the knowledge produced by any oppressed group makes it easier for dominant groups to rule because the seeming absence of dissent suggests that subordinate groups willingly collaborate in their own victimization. Maintaining the invisibility of Black women and our ideas, not only in the United States, but in Africa, the Caribbean, South America, Europe, and other places where Black women now live, has been critical in maintaining social inequalities. Some other things that stand out to me that she wrote. So she talks about intersectional paradigms remind us that oppression cannot be reduced to one fundamental type, and that oppressions work together in producing injustice. In contrast, the matrix of domination refers to how these intersecting oppressions are actually organized, regardless of the particular intersections involved. Structural, disciplinary, hegemonic, and interpersonal domains of power reappear across quite different forms of oppression. I also just appreciate the way that she talks about her own work and voice. She says, I remain less preoccupied with coming to voice because I know how quickly voice can be taken away. My concern now lies in finding effective ways to use the voice that I have claimed while I have it. When it comes to my work, the only thing that is essential is that it contribute toward this end. So again, she is rejecting the separation of thought from action and is really saying, I want the scholarship that I have, I want the voice that I have right now to actually make a change to the material conditions that the people that I care about, the people that I am from and of, that it benefits them. And I think a lot of this resonated with me because, one, I already had strong values related to justice and equality, and coming into academia, I think I had just come off of, a semester of classical theory, classical sociological theory, and there was this push even in our department, like a push against those of us who were studying things. Granted, I don't think it was super evident when I came across this book, but it was bubbling up, this tension and kind of rejection in the department leadership that we had for those who were studying issues like impacting folks of color, gender, like taking a more critical lens, studying social movements. At one point, leaders in our department tried to break up the department and have those of us who studied the topics that I just mentioned and used more like qualitative methods and weren't coming up with these big universalizable statistical models. They tried to split our department, that we would be social relations and they would keep sociology, which was ironic given the field of sociology at that time was really looking more deeply at studying inequality, studying change, studying social movements, and not just from the ivory tower, but to impact change. And that was a big part of me just throughout my grad school experience. So I came across this book in my first year. I was in grad school for 7 years. Yeah, for about 7 years. And I finished really because my dissertation was with a group that I cared about, that I got to know. I studied policing in the Skid Row community of Los Angeles, as well as kind of the origins of policing and policy related to homelessness and policing, and the also organizing amongst groups that are marginalized. And so I partnered with an organization in the Skid Row community, Los Angeles Community Action Network. They let me volunteer in their legal clinic and observe and participate in meetings and do community watch, which I've talked about in previous episodes. But I got to feel like I was contributing to something while I was also studying it. I was conducting materials analysis. I interviewed people. And so that was a big part of my scholarly research. And it's really shaped by this idea that like I became pretty jaded with academia. We spent a lot of time reading journals and research that it's like once you get published there, the only people who see it and read it are other academics. It's basically academia replicating itself. And to me, that's not at all why I went into sociology. And so to experience that in my department, it was really rough for a while. But the biggest compliment that I got when I finished my dissertation was that the organization could actually use some of what I wrote for grants that it was applying for. And I just loved that. I loved that it wasn't just something that only other grad students who are researching similar things access, that it was something that actually had a tangible use for the community that I was studying as well, and the organizing work that I was studying and cared about. Anyway, I think this book was affirming. It also helped me just think about the broader, I guess it helped me think more broadly about what is considered knowledge and the generation of knowledge as well. And I really liked also the activity that, or the assignment that my professor assigned us with this. And we had to really look at our own social location and how we understood where we fit within the matrix of domination, within these systems. And so I examined why it was that gender was my first lens. And it's because I knew, like, growing up a girl, I experienced things differently. It was a site that felt like I could be victimized because I was a girl. I saw differences between the way my dad and my mom fared in their divorce and the perceptions of my mom. And also, I had some sense of my class position. I felt my mom was poor and struggled to be financially secure. And my family, my dad and stepmom that I grew up with, by the time I graduated college or graduated high school, we were solidly middle class, but solidly middle class income wise with 4 kids, more of a strain. I never felt like I could have the clothes that I wanted or like brand names or anything like that. I'm not like saying, oh, poor me. I'm just saying, like, that's how I understood class. Was like, I didn't have kids, So it's like, I was doing fine. I was not struggling. I was not hungry. We were secure financially, but definitely buoyed by debt. And my dad grew up very poor. My stepmom did too, both from large families. My mom, maybe more, like a little bit more middle class growing up, but poverty was definitely part of the experience. And so I had a little bit more of a sense of class. I didn't have a big sense of my race and location when it came to race. I grew up in a predominantly white town. My perception of race had more to do with assimilation and newness in immigrant population. So we did have folks from Mexico and probably other Latin American and Central American countries, and a lot of folks who came and worked as migrant farm workers. And we also had a population of folks from Russia, so white, but like Orthodox in their religion, and so dressed differently, spoke another language. And so to me, I didn't really understand race, but I understood kind of difference from that more like assimilation perspective. So race wasn't as apparent to me, and my understanding of race and the privilege that came along with that didn't deepen until I moved to Los Angeles, really. And race, class, gender. Yeah, so those were like some of the things I looked at in terms of my social location. I really wish I could go. I bet I have that assignment somewhere. I did save some of my grad school papers, and I'm pretty sure that's one. So anyway, that book really stuck with me. It helped me understand my own social location. It helped me understand power not as additive, but complex and intersecting and reinforcing, and just, to think about where we were in this broader kind of matrix of domination. And I just really appreciated the rejection of either or thinking, and being more expansive with the both and. All right, moving on to Being Peace by Thich Nhat Hanh. So this was another book that came to me in graduate school a few years later and not as assigned reading. Instead, it was given to me by a member of my cohort who grad school did a number on, and he really was struggling with his mental health. And I'm pretty sure I was too. Not to the same extent or in different ways, but yeah, it was rough. It was a rough experience for us. And somehow when we were talking, we weren't super close at that point. We had been closer earlier on in our grad school experience, but he recommended the book Being Peace by Thich Nhat Hanh to me, and I'm just so grateful for him for that. I really read it. He may have given it to me earlier, but I really read it when we were in the thick of contract negotiations. At that point, I was a leader in my union, and we were in the thick of contract negotiations with the University of California for our contract. And I was a campus level leader working with other campus level leaders and then statewide leadership to organize for and negotiate around a contract. And our union had factions within it, and it was just highly contentious, both within the context of the union and then in negotiations with the university. And I ended up being in kind of this pressure cooker position within the leadership where I had started out kind of with one faction of the union. I was still connected to it at that point. But also, I think the side of me that was like, yeah, I want to, it's like not block things for the sake of blocking things. And I know that's not what folks would characterize it at, but the way I saw it was like, okay, let's like figure out how to work together to get the best possible agreement we can. And so that was the ethos that I came in with. And ultimately, that ethos was trusted the most amongst the folks of the room. It's like, I'm sure I wasn't perfect for anybody, but that ethos got me to end up playing a key role in the negotiations. And it was really stressful. So I remember I was reading this book. I was talking to my aunt regularly on the phone, my Aunt Babs. I was texting people, like lots of people, like texting them, just asking them to send supportive thoughts and vibes my way. And Being Peace by Thich Nhat Hanh is a mix of things. It's kind of him. I think it was initially talks that were given to peace activists and then put into a book, but it's like a mix of mindfulness practices and kind of that individual, I'll share some of the quotes, but like individual level work, but then also thinking more broadly about our role in society and how the individual connects to peace more broadly. So just to start, something that really resonated with me too, I think, is that engaged Buddhism is this term that was coined by Thich Nhat Hanh, and it's really bridging spiritual growth, like personal spiritual growth, with active, nonviolent, and compassionate service to the world. And so it's not the meditation where you just go sit on a yoga mat and you disconnect from the world. It's about even addressing contemporary social, environmental, and political suffering through engaged and mindful practices. So it's not about shutting things away. It's about moving through the world with mindfulness and intention. I'm just going to breathe for a minute here. Something I have appreciated about Thich Nhat Hanh's work is that often he would share poetry or gathas, which are like mantras to help you keep mindfulness practices present. So one is breathing in, I calm my body. Breathing out, I smile. Dwelling in the present moment, I know this is a wonderful moment. In the book, Thich Nhat Hanh writes, "It is possible to live happily in the here and now. So many conditions of happiness are available, more than enough for you to be happy right now. You don't have to run into the future in order to get more." So it's really about that presence, about recognizing where you are. And in this book, he talks about accepting our feelings as well, and kind of that caring for ourselves and how that's an important part of the piece. So he says, "I would not look upon anger as something foreign to me that I have to fight. I have to deal with my anger with care, with love, with tenderness, with nonviolence." In another place, he writes, "So we are friends, and our happiness depends on each other. According to that teaching, I have to take care of myself, and you take care of yourself. That way we help each other. And that is the most correct perception. If I only say, don't do this, you have to do that, and I don't take care of myself, I can do many wrong things, and that does not help. I have to take care of myself, knowing that I am responsible for your happiness, and if you do the same, everything will be all right." Within this, there's this little bit about responsibility, but also just an awareness that the way we care for ourselves and take care of ourselves has an impact on others as well. And there's some humor and some stories in there. This one's a little longer, but I think it's a good one, so I'll share with you. There's a story I would like to tell you about a woman who practices the invocation of the Buddha Amitabha's name. She's very tough, and she practices the invocation 3 times daily using a wooden drum and a bell, reciting Namo Abhita Buddha. Abhita Buddha. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that somewhat correctly. She pronounces that for an hour each time. When she arrives at 1,000 times, she invites the bell to sound. In Vietnamese, we don't say strike or hit a bell. Although she has been doing this for 10 years, her personality has not changed. She is still quite mean, shouting at people all the time. A friend wanted to teach her a lesson, so one afternoon when she had just lit the incense, invited the bell to sound 3 times, and was beginning to recite Namo Amitabha Buddha, he came to her door and said, "Miss Wynn, Mrs. Wynn." She found it very annoying because this was her time of practice, but he just stood at the front gate shouting her name. She said to herself, "I have to struggle against my anger, so I will ignore that." And she went on, Namo Amitabha Buddha. The gentleman continued to shout her name, and her anger became more and more oppressive. She struggled against it, wondering, should I stop my recitation and go and give him a piece of my mind? But she continued chanting, and she struggled very hard. Fire mounted in her, but she still tried to chant Namo Amitabha Buddha. The gentleman knew it, and he continued to shout, "Miss Wynn, Miss Wynn." She could not bear it any longer. She threw away the bell and the drum. She slammed the door, went out to the gate, and said, "Why do you behave like that? Why do you call my name hundreds of times like that?" The gentleman smiled at her and said, "I just called your name for 10 minutes, and you are so angry. You've been calling the Buddha's name for 10 years. Think how angry he must be." So there's this joke, but it definitely connects to this idea of It's not about sitting forever and practicing being enlightenment. It's about like really letting mindfulness settle in you, like bringing awareness to yourself and how you show up in the world and tending to your emotions. Again, Thich Nhat Hanh writes, meditation is not to get out of society, to escape from society, but to prepare for a re-entry into society. So the book has kind of that individual piece, but also it talks about the connection to our broader world. One of the things that resonates with me are the different mindfulness trainings, which are kind of like key elements of the Buddhist practice. And so from the book, he writes, the first mindfulness training, aware of the suffering, it says, aware of the suffering created by fanaticism and intolerance, we are determined not to be idolatrous about or bound to any doctrine, theory, or ideology, even Buddhist ones. We are committed to seeing the Buddhist teachings as guiding means that help us develop our understanding and compassion. They are not doctrines to fight, kill, or die for. We understand that fanaticism, in its many forms, is the result of perceiving things in a dualistic and discriminative manner. We will train ourselves to look at everything with openness and the insight of inner being in order to transform dogmatism and violence in ourselves and in the world. This resonates with me a lot, this idea of not being so bound to an ideology that it leads to violence and, enforcing it leads to violence. He writes later on to, did I not quote that one? Let's see. He also writes in the book, connected to this idea, if you have a gun, you can shoot 1, 2, 3, 5 people. But you have an ideology and stick to it, thinking it is absolute truth, you can kill millions. Thich Nhat Hanh also writes, preventing war is much better than protesting against the war. Protesting the war is too late. So the book has the mindfulness trainings. It has core practices, including practices of reconciliation and how reconciliation is handled in monasteries, different practices around that. And, he really writes about how to build understanding and compassion to alleviate human suffering. He writes, if I don't understand you, I may be angry at you all the time. We are not capable of understanding each other, and that is the main source of human suffering. His work is really a call to look at the ways that we perpetuate suffering and to move toward peace through living our lives mindfully and with more intention. So this book was something I was reading during this highly contentious time, and it helped me to ground into my values and to move in alignment with my values and intention, or with intention. It, still has a huge impact on my life to this day. For those who, if you want to get to know the practices without as much kind of, I guess, depth or teaching, though I recommend the depth or teaching, but if you want kind of like a light entry into Thich Nhat Hanh and mindfulness practices, I really love the book Pieces Every Step. So that's one that I'll often gift to people. That's one I'll often give to people who have expressed that they want something related to mindfulness or learning about it, or I just recommend it. And then, but Being Peace is a great book. So that was like early-ish on into my, like maybe middle of my union leadership and before I came into a statewide office as secretary, then vice president, then president of the union. And I would love to say that it just made me a peaceful person overnight. No, not at all. I really struggled. And was in a very like pressure cooker, contentious environment a lot of times. And I definitely played into that and was part of it. And when I struggled, I would go back to this book and go back to other teachings, but I think mainly that book at the time. And then there was this point where I was like fantasizing, escaping reality, and I was like, oh my gosh, I want to go to Plum Village, which is the monastic practice center that Thich Nhat Hanh set up in France. And so I was thinking, oh my gosh, I want to go there. And then I read at the back of the book that there was a practice center in Escondido, California, which is close to me, like an hour and a half away. And so in about, I think, 2009, I went for the first time. And now I consider it my home away from home. I don't go as often as I used to, but I have gone in the past. I would go multiple times a year, sometimes for a few weekends. And it's a place where you can actually practice living day to day mindfully and then bring that back into your home. It doesn't just stay in the monastery, bring it back into life. And so I really like that. Highly recommend Deer Park Monastery or any of the monastic practice centers. I'd love to go visit other ones, but such a special place. And yeah, I really appreciated having the opportunity to learn from the monastics there, learn from their teachings, and also just by doing. So those are the 3 books. As I was looking through my bookshelves, there's so many more that I could share with you. Maybe not for so long. Maybe I'll just do 1 book at a time. But I hope that you enjoyed hearing a little bit about books that have shaped me and where I was when I encountered them and how I think about them. And I would love to hear from you. Anything that stood out, of course, from this episode. Have you read any of these books? Also, what are your favorite books? So, as always, thank you for listening in today. Those were invitations to engage, so please send me a note, send me a speak pipe, a voice memo, whatever. I'd love to hear from you. If you want to hear more of the Resourced and Resourceful Leadership podcast, please follow or subscribe to the show wherever you like to listen to, or you can watch your podcasts. To support the show, please leave a 5-star review, share it on social media, share it with a few people who you think would appreciate it. And please check out the link to SpeakPipe in the show notes. I'd love it if you left me a message about what stood out to you from this show or topics that you'd like me to cover in future episodes. You can also share with me thoughts about books, thoughts about potential guests. Thanks again, and take good care.